How do you measure the work you're doing, on social media?
It's definitely a hard one. I guess depends what you want to measure. If you're like last night, I put up a video about it was a photo or an image that was created by scientist Ed Hawkins. And it's basically the average temperature from 1850 until 2022 represented with a color. And so with that video, I put that up and sort of said, this is what's going on. And we need to endorse the fossil fuel treaty.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the podcast, and today is all about environmental impact. I know those two words kind of either send us running to the hills, if there are any hills left, or under the bed because it seems to be the safest place, or up in arms going, what the fuck is everyone talking about? Can we just take a step back, relax? The planet is not burning, it's not drowning, nothing is happening. May be true, may not be true, depending on which side of the group you subscribe to or which ideology you believe in and are passionate about. I'm here today to talk to you and get my guests and I to talk to you about individuals, right? Because we all feel kind of powerless and we all kind of feel like victims sometimes, like don't use plastic. The person who uses plastic is seen as the demon. The person who uses their metal bottle and their metal toothbrush and a metal straw are seen as people who are saving the planet. But it's simpler and more complex than that, I think. Simpler because hey, there is only so much you can do. And complex because there are so many forces at play which don't want to lose out on this way of life that we have all been told is the only way for progress and societies to come out of being backward and being seen as third world or whatever the concepts they try to drive home. But my guest on today's episode is Mitch Pope, who's an environmental activist. And I got him on because I want to understand, right? There are so many aspects, as I said, there's so many complexities. You have scientists giving you data. They have scientists who are talking about the actual impact on oceans, talking about on glaciers, on talking about wildlife, on talking about human impact on the environment, talking about deforestation, urban development, all these various things. But Mitch and I speak about what individuals can do. How can our thought process and the way we look at life, the way we look at what we are doing and why we are doing it, and how that can impact our own future. Because I think if we can account for our individual present and future, I think collectively that will make a change, at least with the people around us, the way we raise our children, the way we pass on this message of what is important, what is seen as important, what is the idea of status, success, and growth, and all these various things that we've been conditioned to believe. And the way to achieve that has been conditioned into our way of thinking, the way of looking at life, whether it comes to the kind of home we live in, the kind of city we live in, the kind of things we do for recreation, the holidays, the kind of things we look at as signs of success, whether the cars we drive, the clothes we wear, the holidays we go on. So all these things come from an individual outlook on life. And I'm here to talk to Mitch today, and Mitch is here to talk to me today. Hey, that works both ways, about these kind of value systems that we can understand and appreciate and maybe even change. Because, hey, no one's here to judge. And if we are here to judge, you know what? Don't be judged. All right. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Mitch Pope. Thank you as always tuning into this podcast. Appreciate you being here. And of course, do go and share with people, do share with friends and not so many friends and friends of friends. And wherever you're listening to this podcast, please do give it a rating if that's possible. If you're watching this on YouTube, much appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and of course, share it if you can. All right. Thank you. Mitch Pope, lovely to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks heaps for having me, Soapy. I'm stoked to be here.
It's great to have different perspectives on a topic that seems to polarize people, that seems to isolate people, that seems to terrify people. So before I talk about your take on climate change and what you've been advocating for on your social media profiles, can I ask a question which might be contrary to your opinion? I'm sitting in Bangalore today, you're in Australia. We have very different climates. We have very different backgrounds when it comes to the society and the society we live in, the culture we kind of grew up in. But I'm comfortable. I'm able to access a computer, talk to you. I'm sitting in an air-conditioned room. Why should I worry about the climate at all?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and that's something that I guess think about all the time. I spend a lot of time advocating for this issue, but most of the time we're safe. for a lot of us, we are like fairly safe a lot of the time and there's not much to worry about. But for a big part of the globe, there's a lot of present issues that are happening. You know, we're seeing more floods, fires, more extreme weather events happening all around the globe. And it's not, I don't think it's, you know, it hasn't been until more recently that we're really starting to link the connection between the climate crisis and these events. Like here in Australia, we've had in 2019, 2020, we had the worst bushfire event in history. It was just millions and millions of hectares of land burned in Australia. It was one of the worst fires on the globe ever. And then years after that, we had flooding event after flooding event on the East Coast as well. And it was just happening so constantly. For a lot of people in Australia, they were deeply affected. A lot of people lost their homes. A lot of people lost absolutely everything. I'm lucky enough that I wasn't affected by fires or floods, but we know that this is real. We know that this is happening around the globe. We know it's presenting very real challenges for so many people, especially the people living in the global south who don't have, you know, basic access to sort of healthcare and easy access to food and things like that, and where crops are being devastated by droughts and floods and people relying on their farms for survival. There's lots of people who are feeling the effects a lot more than us. Unfortunately, there are certain areas that are getting hit the hardest first, and sort of areas where I live. I know some parts of India are obviously really feeling the effects of climate change, maybe not where you live, but we have to be caring about how our actions are affecting other people. And no one is immune to the effects. These have really sort of lots of knock-on effects to food systems and so many other sort of areas of life that, I guess it's such a big topic. I could just go so deep into that answer, but.
Right. The reason I ask you that is because our entire history, whether it's modern history or even go back to the past 1,000 years, has always been marked by big events, right? Whether it's human caused change or other events, whether it's big floods, which happened thousands of years back, or whether it's volcanoes or earthquakes or these natural events. Let's stick to natural events that have literally displaced huge populations, right? So when we look at today, say the past 40 years have been pretty comfortable for all of us, right? And some would argue that's the most comfortable time to be a human being. You know, say 200 years back, life expectancy was short, maybe food was scarce to the level that we're experiencing today. The convenience of getting food delivered or the variety of food available across the globe, right? You come to Australia, you can get whatever you want, from cuisine to access of food to, of course, this is again to a certain segment of population depending on how much money you have. But if we look at where we are today in 2024, can we argue that we've been comfortable? That's why this change is alarming, because it's kind of threatening the way of life that we've gotten used to. And a follow-up to that is, haven't we always as a species thrived through adversity?
Yeah, great questions. Well, to the first question, absolutely. And I think it's true that we live in the most peaceful time in history as well. So although there's still a lot of war happening around the globe, like we're seeing what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, in Palestine and in Ukraine as well. There's so much going on, but we're still living in the most peaceful time in history. In regards to the climate crisis, we do live very comfortably now, or a lot of us do, especially us sort of living in the West who are fortunate enough to have easy access to all our basic needs. They're all met quite easily. A lot of this comfortability has come from burning fossil fuels and the Industrial Revolution. This fossil fuels has allowed us to sort of pull so many people out of poverty, raise life expectancy. It's really sort of elevated our standard of living. Another guy, Damien Cole, who was a really big sort of advocate against oil drilling in the Great Australian Bight, he said it's like fossil fuels got us here and we need to move on. And I guess it's like it's helped raise the standard of living so much now, but now we're really starting to see the effects that it's having on us. And so we have to recognize the history and what it's given us, but also adapt to change and accept that we have to change and we can't continue on this way. You know, we've got to recognize the challenges that it's presenting us with us today. And we've accelerated the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that's what's fueling such changes to the climate today from burning fossil fuels. Yeah, interesting question about have humans thrive through adversity. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about that one before, to be honest. I guess it's probably adversity is what sort of helps us grow and brings people together. And that's definitely present. The climate crisis is bringing people together. It's bringing communities together to act, to, you know, there's so many different groups of people coming together saying we need to do something. Communities who are figuring out how to become more resilient to natural disasters, and people who are banding together to fight against the fossil fuel project and the offshore oil drilling that's happening, or people who are banding together to protect their land. I guess, yeah, it's probably not a straight answer though.
Yeah, the reason I ask you adversity is not out of a challenge, but it's kind of when I look at, say, you know, a segment of population that's not benefited from the fossil fuel revolution and what it brought to modern society. They're still living, you know, burning wood stoves and barely having food to eat. But for them, they're like, doesn't really matter whether it's fossil fuels or battery, right? Because I didn't benefit from those years of progress. But the reason I mention adversity is because when you have a certain way of life as a result of a certain fuel type that has benefited so many thousands and millions of people over years, but now that particular way of life is a threat to our existence. So that adversity forces us to look at the way we look at ourselves, right? Whether the way we work, the way we travel, the way we kind of farm, the way we store food. And I think in that way, the adverse change presented by human-led global warming is showing us, hey, you know, we don't have to travel as much. Maybe we can look at travel in a different way. Maybe we can look at food production in a different way, the way we eat in a different way. And I think in that way, humans can adapt to adversity. We might not have access, say, in 25 years to as much variety of options, right? I can't just get guacamoles flown from California just because I want to, or whatever it may be, just a silly example. But all those things are being revisited now. Eat more locally, travel more locally, don't use as many flights where not required. Because I did this recent conference about a few months back where it said art and climate change, how can they merge to kind of have a new future? And in that way, in my past, when I was doing shows as a stand-up comedian, I would take flights 5 times a month to go to different parts of India or different parts of the world to do shows, literally a day in, day out. Now, I'm like, do I need to travel as much? And it's not because I'm more of a conscious kind of human being about climate change, but it's like, can I do fewer trips? Also, it's also taxing on the body and mind, right? Doing so many kind of overnight trips. So in that context of adversity, when we're faced with, you know, every flight that you take has certain amount of emissions that cause certain things. And yes, maybe the CO2 levels we're seeing now is as a result of what happened in 1900s, but can all these indications and these signs be a way for us to revisit the way we look at life and what we mean by success and the way we mean by fulfilled career and all those various things that we take as signs of progress in society?
Yes, absolutely. That's a really, really great question. And I think people sort of learning about the climate crisis and what's fueling it and the challenges behind it, when you first start understanding it, I personally didn't think as deeply into it. But now, you know, we understand the problem is burning fossil fuels is heating up the planet, but it's not the root cause of the problem. And, you know, going down to the root cause of it is we've got this system where basically we're always chasing more. We're always hungry for more. And when it comes to big business is thriving off profits at all costs and perpetual growth at all costs. And so this is the problem with the climate crisis is, yes, we need to transition our energy system, but that is also such a tiny part. And it's about changing the way we live and changing the way we our outlook on life as well, and thinking about what really makes us happy. And I think in Australia, definitely there's been a generational shift in people. There's so many different crises and challenges happening in Australia. We've got a housing crisis, a cost of living crisis. For someone like me to now, I think I would need an average wage of $130,000 a year to afford a house in one of the capital cities in Melbourne or Sydney. And wow. Everyone now is just saying, this is ridiculous. Why am I going to work my whole life to try and afford this house, something's got to be different. And it's all kind of starting to tie in together. We're chasing more and more and more. And now we're starting to realize, what's it all for? And it all kind of goes down to that one thing. We need to simplify life a bit more and simplify things and tread a little lighter on the earth as well. And it's a difficult one. It's easy to communicate the environmental challenges and that fossil fuels are causing global heating and stuff like that, but it's harder to get into the philosophy of it and help people understand that side of it a bit more.
I think that's the side I want to talk to you about today more in depth, because a lot of things are out of our control. I was reading an article by in the Guardian where they spoke to scientists saying, what can individuals do? So they said, of course, there's a certain amount individuals can do, but until it's on a policy level, it's on a scale which is beyond an individual, where it's not just community, but when it's on a corporate scale, on a government scale, until that changes are put into place, we can't really impact the results as much as we want to, right? We can't get to that 1.5 degree or reducing below 1.5 degree. So on an individual level, what you're saying is truly important, because our value systems have been shaped by if you want to call it, the wealth that fossil fuels potentially offer to human beings, right? The symbols of wealth that could be attained, whether it's the cars we drive, the size of the house, the scale that we live on, the amount we travel, the amount we can dispose. Because something as simple as being seen going on a international holiday, where in the 90s, India was, wow, this kid's parents have a lot of money, right? They went and they went to the US and came back, and it was seen as wow. So seeing someone indulge in foreign travel was a status symbol. But now, of course, it's much more affordable. So that's probably one of the things that fossil fuels or cheaper fossil fuels is offered to people in a society like India, where the middle class has now become a lot stronger. Earlier, you would travel, maybe, you would go on a family holiday in a car where a lot of you would share that trip. But now you have the affordability of 10 people taking 10 different, rather being able to afford 10 flight tickets and going wherever they want to. And from the 90s to now, I see a lot of people traveling internationally, like pretty much. I mean, of course, there is a lot of poverty in India, but there are a lot more people traveling internationally. But if we can focus on this message of changing the idea of success, right? These indications of success, if we can look at them saying, and not in a patronizing way, saying, if you travel, you're a horrible human being. If you fly in a private jet, you're Satan himself, right? But just to reflect, because this is where I feel the change can happen. It's not about what can an individual do by drinking out of a metal bottle as opposed to throw away plastic bottles, but it's how you view what is important to you in life, as opposed to just chasing those indications of success, which have been presented as the only way to come up in society. And I think that's an important conversation.
Absolutely agree. And I think that idea of success is really being pushed by businesses making money, and it's advertising, and it's presenting to you, this is the latest shoe, and so this is the shoe you have to have if you want to be happy, or you want to be cool. And so everyone wants to buy that shoe, and now this is the next holiday destination. So if you want to fit in, you've got to go here, and it's all down to, we've got to keep spending money to keep up. And it's this consumption culture, and it's this overconsumption that's really, really causing the problems of the planet today. We've got almost 8 billion people on Earth, and there's always a common argument that there's too many people. Like, doesn't matter what you try and do, the overpopulation is the problem. Science says that it's not true. Earth has a carrying capacity of, I think, 11 billion. And it's just, there's a few small people who are using up well over their share of Earth's resources. And it goes down to that measure of, I guess, success and what you think makes you happy as well. They're definitely, and that's something I've thought a lot about lately, is what's the best way to communicate this problem and bring people on board? Is it directly presenting the facts, or is it trying to encourage and show people another way? We don't need to keep buying things. We don't need to keep going on holidays to be happy. We can look at living a more simple life, learning to be happier by spending time with our friends and family and spending time in nature. And I'm very happy, and spend barely any money. You know, I'm never not chasing that constant thing. And I consider myself so happy because I'm doing what I love in sort of advocating for something bigger than myself. And it really gives you a purpose and that meaning as well. And I feel like the other thing I sort of think about is, as humans, our basic needs are, well, us in the global north, especially, our basic needs are very easily met. You know, we go to the supermarket to buy our food. We've got a roof over our head. We can go to work to get a job fairly easily to earn that money to buy those things. And so I think a lot of people struggle with what's my purpose. With our basic needs are met, which would once have been our purpose to survive. And so people struggle with that sense of identity and meaning and that idea of success. So we're always kind of chasing more. And I really hope there's that sort of shift. And I think that shift will probably come. And especially considering a lot of these, like we've got in Australia, this cost of living crisis and housing crisis, a lot of these things are linked. People are realizing what really makes me happy. Is it buying a house? Is it working 5-6 days a week? Or is it living a more simple life? And, you know, if that becomes more normal, it's a big sort of idea to ponder, I guess. And you had a question, but there was something you said before that question as well. I can't remember what it was, but I felt like I had a good answer to it.
Sorry, I speak a lot.
No, that's good. I like it. It gives me lots to think about.
No, I think it's a similar few points that I've been recirculating over the past few minutes. And I think just to come back to that is, you know, when I past 3 years now, I've been off stage. I've not been a active comedian. But you know, those things that drove me, besides, of course, initially the joy of telling jokes in front of a room of people and making them laugh was thoroughly enjoyable. But then, you know, the business of comedy kicks in, which of course a lot of people can navigate, but those same symbols of success keep popping up, right? How much do you travel? Where do you travel? How many cities? How big are the rooms? Then you do theaters, you stadiums if you're big enough. And then how do you travel? Is it flights? Is it business class? Is it staying in a 5-star? Because you have your tech riders, right? The tech riders keep getting better and bigger for musicians, for comedians, for actors, whoever it may be in the entertainment space. And I'm coming from there. And now sometimes I look back, I'm like, did I stop when I was just on the cusp of getting to the next level? And it makes me anxious. You know, I'm like, man, did I give up on something which I was meant to do? And sometimes I'm like, I'm glad I gave it up because it's given me time to reflect, and not in a preachy way where I'm like, oh, I'm better than others, I could give up. But no, I had the privilege of having one home, which I share with my parents, my wife and my daughter. And all those things of getting a bigger house, having multiple houses as investments, or having all these teams that travel with you because you have that much more demands on you, all those things don't appeal to me as much anymore, you know, because I had the time to reflect because of the lockdown, which was an enforced time of reflection. I'm like, will I get back to a place in comedy where I'm like, you know what, I'm happy doing the 50-seater rooms. I'm happy traveling, not as often. Those values of success in comedy don't appeal to me anymore. Will those things be okay with me when I go back, or if I go back to doing shows on stage? So it's really been amazing that I've had this ability to, or the opportunity to look at where I was and where I am today, because I think a lot of us are not able to kind of take a step back because we're so immersed in the messaging and the conditioning and this idea that if you stop, you're going to lose out, which is something which is not true, because if you do pause, you actually have an opportunity and a moment to kind of say, hey, why am I doing what I'm doing? And I think that's just that one question might be able to help you reset, which a lot of us are scared to kind of face because we feel that it's an opportunity lost, or it's a moment which I'll never get back, or it's a version of me that I lose out on. And I feel that is something which can really change the way we view our situation, and I think help us when we kind of guide our children or the generation that's coming up now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great message. I've definitely had a lot of similar experiences. One of the things I struggle with is committing to one thing, whether it was sport or whether it was something I like doing. I love doing photography. I used to love playing footy, like AFL football here in Australia, and lots of other things. And my problem is I get right into it for a little bit and then I kind of get bored of it. And I've always sort of wondered in certain scenarios that the same thing, if I had stuck it out, where would it have led me to today?
Yeah.
But I also ask myself the question is, what was I doing it for? And what was the purpose behind it? And nothing has given me greater satisfaction than what I'm doing now in the sort of more activism space with I'm trying to do as much as I can with creating awareness sort of videos, advocating against different sort of fossil fuel projects that we've got locally as well. Yeah, I'm finding it's not going to be one of those things that's I do for a bit and get bored of, because it's so much more important. The why is so great. And yeah, I guess that's the thing as well is, you know, if you're not happy in your life or you're searching for something more, it's about asking, you know, what's the purpose behind what you're doing? And that's probably goes in hand with our constant search for more and that hunger for more, for better cars, bigger houses, higher paying jobs, climbing the corporate ladder, more money. That's kind of been ingrained into our society from when we're younger. We have to go straight to university to get a good job, and that's what we have to do. And a lot of people don't know what they want to do when they get out of university and pick something and it doesn't fulfill them, and there's not really the why there. And then they're working because they bought a house because that's what they thought they had to do, and people are just finding not happy. And it's asking the why behind it. What's the purpose? And there's a really good idea called ikigai, and it's about what you're doing. Is it what does the world need? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? And what can you be paid for? And it's about bringing those together to really, like, I guess, if you tick all those boxes, it's going to be something that it fulfills you and is a pathway for you.
I think, you know, when you view abundance or the idea of abundance from a point of scarcity, that I need to fill up my life because without that, I'm not whole, then all these kind of factors come in, because you can then, you know, climb up the ladder of success, you know, from the smaller car to a bigger car to a luxury car to the next biggest car or the next most valued car perceivably, to whether it's the hotels, the flights you travel. But strangely then, when you view it from a place of scarcity, you're not happy in the home you own. You want a few more homes because that enhances your status or your perceived value. And then those homes become a burden. The holidays you go on, you're stressed about maintaining those homes, or you're worried that you won't have a job to go back to, or you might lose a promotion because the person who's competing with you for that promotion is actually at work when you're on holiday. So all these stresses add up under the guise of abundance. But to what I'm viewing, right, or understanding, you know, using myself as an example or a muse to kind of process these ideas, is abundance doesn't have to come from plenty, right? It comes from just knowing that you're enough to start with. And when that happens, then you can enjoy the home you live in and not worry about 3 more or how big it is. And you kind of start looking at within the home, what can you take joy out of, right? Who's with you at that home, or what are you doing in that home? And that shift is so hard for people because it's not seen as progress. It's not seen as having a goal. It's not seen as being ambitious enough. It's not being career driven enough. And I'm not saying good or bad in any way. And especially in a world which is so connected, I'm able to automatically hear and see what's going on around the world, which in a way is great because it gives awareness, right? Because I know that the flooding in Australia or certain climate events affecting certain parts of the world, which I would never have access to unless I lived there. So the same connectivity that we're experiencing that can bring us all on the same page with information, which of course I'll talk about later because there's, again, disinformation happening. But the same connectivity can also be seen as a kind of trap from which you're hard to get out of when you're constantly being fed this messaging that, having one home is not good enough. You need to be, so
Yeah.
so the platforms you use to spread your messaging, I want to understand how you navigate that, because this is something which baffles me, right? I think social media is a great tool. I think it was amazing what it did to bring humanity together, but the way it's being weaponized now with these messages is extremely, it's for me hard to understand. How can we break out of this trap?
Yeah, there's so much I could answer to that. I guess going back to that, again, bigger house, climbing the corporate ladder, that it's never going to be enough. You're always going to be searching for more. And I was even thinking about it today. I was just after having lunch, and I was just sort of always thinking about what I'm doing next. And I always have to pull myself back to, life is happening right now. Like if you're not happy right now, then you've got to change something, and you've got to find that within yourself. And that's it, connecting more with the people around you and being happy with who you are as a person and your identity and what you're doing, rather than what you've got and your job. And social media has definitely played a role in that. People are sort of boasting about what they're doing and where they're going and the sort of jobs they've got and their new car and their new house, and people want to keep up with that. And so there's definitely so many challenges with social media. I always find myself getting sucked into it when I try my absolute best not to, waking up in the morning and just going on my phone. And I go through phases where I don't do that. And yeah, it is difficult. And that's sort of something that I deal with, is I'm putting content on social media as a way to try and spread this message. And for me, one side of me is saying, oh, I don't want social media. It's taking you away from what's real, and it's taking you away from the present moment. It's time you're spending on your phone. You could be spending outside, or you could be doing something that you enjoy, but you're getting sucked into social media. But on the other hand, the world is on social media. The world is on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok or whatever. I don't use all of them, but that's where people are. That's where a lot of people get their news and things like that as well. I can't put videos up on free-to-air TV because you can't do that. I don't.
There's a barrier to that, right? It's not that easy.
Yeah, that's it. But social media has allowed people to express themselves and share that information freely. And so that's why it's an incredible tool for the climate crisis. We can share information all around the world within seconds. If something happens in India, something happened 5 seconds ago, I could know about it right now, which is amazing. And that's why it's such a tool that has to be utilized on our side. And it definitely is. I guess one thing that I sort of think about is, what positive impact is that actually having? How much it's you can get caught up with, there's this many people have seen the video, this many people have commented on it, but is that actually having a positive impact? Is it just numbers on the algorithm, or is it actually, instilling some motivation and some action into people? Is it giving people, is it teaching people things that they didn't know about? And is it making them want to go and do more to help protect our planet? And so I agree. There's lots of challenges, but it definitely can be a useful tool at the same time. And it's just the way I think that it's utilized.
How do you measure something like that? Because, of course, putting it up and playing to the algorithm is very important, because that's the reach and how it's determined. But, when you're you are at the mercy of the platform, right? You have to play the game. You have to play the way those tools are being provided to the user. And besides the likes and the views, which is, of course, one metric of how much your video is done on impact and reach, and they give you those analytics, right? It actually, those words, impact and reach and footprint. But how do you, because, when you teach a student a particular thing in class, as a teacher, you're able to get that feedback, whether they picked up the concept or not, whether the message was received, understood, processed, right? But people will comment, of course, and that's a great feedback loop. But how do you measure the work you're doing? And this, of course, is the work you're doing as well, but I'm just putting it out at large. How do you measure the work you're doing, on social media?
It's definitely a hard one. I guess depends what you want to measure. If you're like, last night I put up a video about it was a photo or an image that was created by scientist Ed Hawkins. And it's basically the average temperature from 1850 until 2022 represented with a color stripe. It's called warming stripes. And you can see blue lines, like lots of blue lines. And then it starts to go white. There's a few dark blue, white stripes. And then it starts to get red closer to where we are now. In the last sort of 30 years, it goes from this white to really light red color, a pretty strong red and that's a pretty concerning image. It's a great story to tell how the earth is warmed. And so with that video, I put that up and sort of said, this is what's going on. And we need to endorse the fossil fuel treaty, which is basically a treaty calling to stop the expansion of fossil fuels. So I put that in there, link in my bio, sign that. And so we had quite a few people comment saying, yep, signed it. So if you're measuring something like that, like a petition or something, it's if people say they've signed it, you can see that. But in terms of, what I really want to get out of it is encouraging people to, there's so many different aspects of it too. Like could be, and so many different target audiences in that sort of broad range. But it could be people who are completely involved in the movement, but are feeling hopeless and are feeling like we're not going to be able to do anything. Is it, so targeting people like that who, to say, look what we've achieved. And, we need to keep going. There's so much to be hopeful for. Or there's other people who are, probably understand the problems, but feel like they shouldn't do anything because they aren't the problem. They're not the fossil fuel, they're not the oil executive. And it's like, well, that oil executive is not going to solve the problem. So you have to play a bit of a part in it. And so it's figuring out what the audience is, but it's really hard to measure unless someone says, your video made me go to a protest or something like that. It's really difficult. I haven't figured that out yet.
No, what I find interesting is, someone like you who's providing facts in a time where facts are questioned, at least the truth is interpreted to suit your agenda. You can take some data which, as you just said, presented by a scientist, and you can put it out there. But someone else who maybe who doesn't subscribe to the climate change crisis might say, hey, that's rubbish. Come on, you can manipulate the data. And there is a lot of that going on where it's being weaponized. Data is being weaponized. The truth is being weaponized to suit certain political agendas or certain initiatives. So someone like you who is clearly, trying to put out facts and information and drive your passion for this cause on social media to help others become more aware, or at least spread the information and try to gain awareness. How do you make sure that the information you use is not taken out of context? How do you make sure it's accurate? Because of course you have, I've got people on this podcast who are researching plastic pollution. I've got people who are researching the impact of global warming on the whale population. I've got people who are doing the microbiomes in the Amazon. So there are various kinds of scientists and people doing it. But for someone who's an activist with a non-scientific field, how do you ensure that your information is, because it has to be that much more compelling, right? Because you are someone who's taking information from different sources. So how do you, in a world and in a time like today, ensure that you get as much accuracy from the information you're putting out?
Absolutely. I guess that's the first thing is I'm not a scientist. And so many people who are in the movement aren't scientists, but we are basically responding to and presenting the scientific facts and consensus. And so that's it. It's about not, Fridays for Future and Greta Thunberg and their whole sort of mantra is unite behind the science. And they're not going to push any sort of made up ideas that aren't scientific. Their thing is we're just trying to communicate the science. And it's about following and utilizing accredited sort of platforms and news sources as well, and scientific journals and things like that, and science that's peer reviewed. And so that Ed Hawkins warming stripes photo is very credible, and all of the data is that is being presented, and that we're sort of, the warming data from the last year and things like that, it's all accepted by scientists, and it's accepted and presented by credible news sources. So yeah, and I guess my sort of angle as well is I try and be not completely scientific and facts, and also try and give people ideas to think about as well. So rather than just talking about just science, saying we've got this planet, and what we're doing to it is having a really bad impact. Let's have a think about that. Let's have a think about what we want our future to be. And you can, if you don't believe what I'm saying, you can look at the science as well. Yeah, I guess it's about credible sources and things like that.
Yeah, because the idea of the planet as your home, it's so vast, so you can't kind of look at it like that, right? Because you're like, if someone comes and shits all over our apartment and kind of tears off the roof and just, subjects us to a lot of heat and, flooding, and we're going to get a little upset, right? We're like, hey, can you take it easy? It's my home. But to think of the planet as your home in that scale is a little hard.
Yeah.
And, you spoke about the reason why we're here is fossil fuels. And now, of course, a lot of people are kind of pushing for more renewable sources of energy, whether it's solar, whether it may be wind, and maybe hydroelectric, nuclear. And of course, the biggest one kind of spoken about now is electric, right? Especially when it comes to mobility. But someone would argue then it's not really thought through, because we don't know what's going to happen to those batteries when they're exhausted, or what's going into those batteries, and the number of people being exploited to get those minerals or those elements being used in the batteries. So what is the future without fossil fuels? And according to you, if we have to make that transition from a fossil fuel to a non-fossil fuel, is it realistic? And if it is realistic, what's the time frame we're looking at? And what can the replacement, the future look like?
Absolutely. And, again, not being a scientist, but being a science climate nerd and spending a lot of time listening and reading books about this sort of stuff. The first big problem, the first big challenge is we're trying to transition the energy system of a globe that is so energy intensive, and our consumption of resources is so high. I can't remember the number, but it's billions of tons of a material footprint of sort of resources that we consume each year. And so you got to think about it is the amount of cars that are on the road, petrol, diesel, guzzling cars at the moment. We're trying to switch all those out with electric cars. And then people who fly all over the world, we're trying to build hydrogen planes for people to fly. And then for the ships, we're trying to figure out how to make that less energy intensive. And we're still just consuming and consuming and consuming. And then all the resources, the lithium and cobalt and things like that going into the batteries are being mined out of the global south. And these communities are being heavily impacted to make these batteries and things like that. And so what sort of the climate movement is trying to push for, and going a bit deeper into it, is it's not just about changing our fossil fuels and not just changing our energy source from fossil fuels to renewables. The difficult thing is if we keep adding, every time we add renewable energy to the grid, it helps sort of give us more energy to use. And it helps basically increases our energy use. It adds it on top of fossil fuel use. And so we're not seeing our emissions go down, because we're seeing energy just go up, and it's giving us more energy to make more stuff.
Right.
Countries, we need to focus on using less resources. And a big one is not measuring GDP growth for success, not measuring the income of all resources for success. We need to actively reduce our energy use as much as possible and change the system and change the way we do things. And it's that saying system change, not climate change. We need a big energy system change, but we need a global change in the way we do things. We need much better public transport systems to get those cars off the road, rather than just changing them to electric. We need more localized communities and to grow food more locally, rather than growing our food on one end of the globe to just export around because it's cheaper. We need to grow up locally and not measure profits as the indicator of success. So we can do that. And so we can reduce our emissions in so many ways without even transitioning away from fossil fuels. We obviously have to. But if we look at the changes in the systems with as I just said, we can start to look at this is going to make reducing our energy use so much easier and so much quicker. So transitioning to renewable energy, but changing the way we live and the way we do things as well. So rather than, the time frame, if we're trying to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy 100% is going to take such a long time if we're trying to keep up with the growth and demand of energy use at the moment. It keeps growing, and fossil fuels have been coupled with energy use for such a long time. It's starting to break away, but it's still rising together. You can see that. And so rather than, as I said, rather than just looking at energy, we need to look at the whole way we live and the way we do things, which will allow us to reduce our emissions and meet targets within a much shorter time frame, not decades, rather than decades, within years, to be able to do this. So, and that's a really difficult one to communicate to people. We've been doing things for such a long time. We've been driving cars, we've been ships, planes, whatever. It's all been such a long time. So why are we going to change it now? But we have to understand that we're consuming and consuming and consuming. We can't do this forever. We live on a finite planet with finite resources. We can't have infinite growth forever. And so rather than just thinking about energy use and energy sources, it's our whole system.
So I think the biggest point is to manage your own expectations before expecting others to make massive policy shifts, because I think that's what the idea is, right? If you can look at what you're doing and why you're doing it and start it from there, it just, and kind of reflect on why we've been told to do certain things in a certain way. I think that's something which will just help on an individual level.
Absolutely. And sort of helping bring about that energy, that system change as well that we need from an individual level. Like we look at it, it's like, well, public transport or locally grown food or a lot of things, you as an individual can't make that happen by yourself. And so people feel powerless. But there's so many things that you can do. And it's sort of like the degrowth movement. It's a really growing movement, which is around the idea of degrowth, which is kind of what I'm talking about. Which is individuals, I guess from an individual level, it's, riding your bike more, growing your own fruit and veg, supporting locally grown veggies and local farmers and small businesses, not flying and not traveling as much, and working less, buying less stuff. And this is all sort of individual changes we can make. I've been riding my bike to work so much, not driving my car, and I just don't like driving my car anymore. I just have way more fun on my bike. I put in a good podcast or an audio book and go outside and just really enjoy it. And these are all simple individual changes we can make, sort of in addition to calling for that system change that we need on that more activist front that we also strongly need more people to be a part of.
And I think I'm going to say one more thing, which I'm trying to do. It's not easy at all, but I think to try to enjoy the space within you so you don't keep looking outside for more space to fill up and enjoy.
Yeah, well, that's the big thing as well, is trying to be present in the moment and be happy with what's going on and not getting caught up in all these fights and these injustices that you're trying to help solve.
Yeah. And I think, 10 holidays a year is not going to make you fulfilled if you're not really enjoying time with yourself where you are,
Yeah, absolutely.
Easier said than done, of course. It's very hard, but I think it's a great place that a lot of us have forgotten that we actually have access to. So, Mitch, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me and for the work you do, putting out the message that you believe in, and you're so passionate about the area that you are now focused in and you're stuck to. So thanks for sharing the ideas, your points of view, and the information as well. So appreciate you being here today. Thank you, Mitch.
Yeah, no, thank you, Soapy. Yeah, stoked to be here, and some great questions, great ideas, and it's definitely given me more things to think about. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad that we could have this conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, please do check out the other episodes on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And I would much appreciate it if you could like the video, share it with people who you think might enjoy it. And of course, do subscribe to the channel because it will help me and the podcast grow and reach more people just like you. So thanks again. Appreciate it.